السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. If at any time during this, if you don't hear me, just let me know, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah.
Okay, so let's begin with some check-ins. How's everyone doing? How has your week been? What are you looking forward to in the weekend? And before the weekend, also tomorrow, until the weekend starts officially. And what are you not looking forward to? And what is holding you back? What are you afraid of? What is making you worried about what's coming up that you're not looking forward to it? And what are some challenges you're facing? And how are you addressing them? Okay, so this is the activity that we had last time. We didn't actually go over it, but just a reminder. Someone reaches out to you, tells you about depression. They're going through some depression, or at least they're feeling depressed, right? Meaning they might not have actually gone to somebody to get diagnosed with depression, but let's say they're feeling this way, and they might have possible suicide ideation. And I wanted to clarify that. So the ideation here is whether the person has thought about committing suicide and not actually planned for it, or the person has thought about suicide and has actually planned for it and has taken steps towards it. In both cases, although in the second case you're going to be depending on what your understanding is of things, or depending on your exposure of certain things and so on in the context you're in, you may actually be required to report this or to do something to make sure that the person doesn't actually take the steps towards suicide. But just understand that I'm referring to both over here, both end possibilities to this initial idea in their mind, essentially. So this person is going through a lot of difficulties. Nothing is going their way. Everything seems to be going the opposite. They keep on failing. They're looking, they feel extremely incompetent about handling different things and stuff, and they're annoyed that other people are not facilitating this process because they're feeling that the other person is either intentionally harming them or being careless and carefree about things and stuff, right? And so they are getting overwhelmed because of that. And maybe the interaction of other people may be coming off as very negative and all that. But this is what the person is saying, that they're being rude, like other people are being rude to me, they're not really caring about me and so on. And they have also therefore distanced themselves from most people, and their sleep schedule has been impacted negatively and so on. And this person is staying up at night, for example, or anytime they're alone, they're thinking about all of their struggles and failures and eventually worthlessness. So he just wants somebody to care about them, and nobody is seeming to do that. So how do you address this? Okay. So remember to think about this. Think about the answers as we go through. We'll come back to this. This is the missing link that you need to, your brain is trying to solve, and we're going to give it some time to try to come up with solutions. And it's going to be doing that in the back of your mind as we focus on other things. So it's going to be looking for solutions. It's going to be looking for solutions in whatever goes on afterwards. In other words, I'm priming you with this before we give you the answer, and filling in the middle when your brain is trying to solve the puzzle with certain things that I'm expecting your brains to look for the answers in. Okay. So with that, just to review really quick. Now, some of these keywords might flash out to you guys because I kind of primed you. So your brain is actually sort of trying to still solve that puzzle, and so it's going to look for answers, and so some things are going to stand out more than other things. And there are theories there's two different theories in terms of how the brain works, and why, for example, you hear your name in the middle of a crowd, even when you're focused on something else, right? And everyone's talking and stuff, but then you're talking to somebody else and somebody calls your name, and suddenly you just like, you know, pay attention to that and stuff, and you try to figure out who's calling your name. So there's like different theories and stuff in terms of how that happens and stuff and why it happens and stuff. Nonetheless, you can understand what I'm trying to do over here. Now you might look at these things, and especially now, and because I'm saying this, you're going to start seeing more of this, right? So here, and I'm intentionally saying those things because I want you to start thinking about this. So in these, in this list of things that we could talk about, case studies that we can look at, you might actually be searching. Your brain is actually searching right now, trying to figure out if any of these things can give you any of these things, and the concepts, meaning their descriptions and stuff, right? These concepts, right? And any of their attributes or descriptions might give you some solutions to that missing link situation in the scenario that we mentioned earlier. So what are some things here, for example? And your brain is doing this activity, scanning these, trying to figure out like all the different attributes and different like tags, right? That we talked about for each of these that's in your brain already, or different things that, you know, different possibilities that it might have had in the brain, right? And then it's trying to see if any of those have any similarities or could have any similarities to the scenario that we talked about. And then it might even start thinking about, for example, what are some of the things that people do in any of these categories that might actually be useful in that particular other scenario that we had started off with. So just some things to keep in mind. Your brain is doing this, but because I've also primed it a little bit more by speaking about it like that, it's going to look for those things even more. Okay, now here's the thing that we were going to do. But wait a minute. Let's have a pause. It's an intellectual stimulation thing. Okay, so it's an intermission. And what is that intermission? It's a game. So, pick one. Which one should we start off with?
What's the one on the right?
All right. Did you know that I wanted you to pick the second one? I wanted you to pick this one. Because it goes over something that this one is going to actually go deeper into. So I wanted it to be this one that we pick. All right, ready?
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
All right. So some things to think about. You might have gotten some ideas in terms of how to solve the puzzle in the beginning. But let's kind of build on this a little bit more.
year ago, I asked my YouTube followers to play a simple computer program.
His name is Mark Rober, and he worked with NASA, but he also ended up working with, he started, afterwards, he started his own company, and he did his, he has like a YouTube channel, and he does a lot of the, science-related stuff over here. So just some background on him, and that's what he means over here by his YouTube subscribers.
Puzzle that I made with a buddy. The object of the puzzle was to get your car across.
Let's restart really quick.
About a year ago, I asked my YouTube followers to play a simple computer programming puzzle that I made with a buddy. The object of the puzzle was to get your car across the maze by arranging these code blocks that represent typical computer programming operations, such as if-else statements and while loops. Once you thought you had a good code, you would hit run, and your car would move based on the commands you had in the program. So I asked my YouTube followers to play it because I said I wanted to prove that anyone from any background could learn to code. 50,000 of them took the challenge and attempted the puzzle. But the truth was that I didn't actually care about proving that anyone could learn to code. What they didn't know is that we actually randomly served up two slightly different versions of the puzzle. In one version, if you hit run and you weren't successful, you didn't lose any of your starting 200 points. We showed you this message. However, in the other version, if you hit run, and again, you weren't successful, we showed this slightly different message, stating that you lost 5 points from your starting 200 points. That was the only difference. In one version, if you failed, we simply took away 5, no value in the real world. No one will ever see these completely meaningless fake internet points. That minor difference is crucial to keep in mind for the results I'm about to show you from the 50,000 data points we collected. For those who were penalized for failed attempts, their success rate was around 52%. For those who were not penalized, their success rate was 68%. That statistically significant delta of 16% was really surprising and almost seemed too hard to believe until we looked at another piece of data that we collected, which was attempts to solve before finding success. It's shown in orange right here. So those who didn't see failing in a negative light nearly had 2.5 times more attempts to solve the puzzle. As a result, naturally, they saw more success and therefore learned more. So if you think about that and sort of unpack these results, the trick to learning more and having more success is finding the right way to frame the learning process. And this observation seemed really profound to me. It made me wonder, what if you just framed the learning process in such a way that you didn't concern yourself with failure? How much more successful could you be? How much more could you learn? And the next thought was that if this is a real effect, clearly there must be some evidence for this in real life. It made me think of toddlers. It's my boy. I helped make that. They are constantly trying new things, and they certainly aren't concerned with failure. When my son learned to walk, he didn't think about how dumb he might look if he fell down. And as his parents, we didn't punish him if he wasn't successful either. The focus was always on the end goal, and we celebrated the successes with him. And as a result of constantly failing and trying and discovering new things during that phase of our life, we discover so many more new capabilities within ourselves, and it's not even close to any other time in our life. But maybe using a toddler is sort of cheating because their brains are different than ours. To make the case that perhaps they aren't that different than us, I'd like to tell you about a plumber I first met when I was 8 years old. He was Italian. When Super Mario Brothers came out, my friends and I became obsessed. Like, we wanted to get to the castle and rescue the beautiful Princess Peach from the evil Bowser. We get to school and ask each other, like, dude, what level did you make it to? Did you pass the game? We never asked each other about details on all the different ways we might have died. When it comes to games like this, no one ever picks up the controller for the first time, and then after jumping into a pit thinks, I'm so ashamed, that was such a failure, and they never want to try again, right? What really happens is they think, oh, I've got to remember, there's a pit right there. So I think next time I'm going to come out with a little more speed. I'm going to jump a little bit later. The focus and obsession is about beating the game, not how dumb you might look if you get hit by a sliding green shell. And as a direct result of that attitude, of learning from but not being focused on the failures, we got really good, and we learned a ton in a very short amount of time. We were the right side of this graph. This is what I call the Super Mario effect, focusing on the princess and not the pits, to stick with the task and to learn more. This caused me to reflect and realize that there were lots of other examples from my own personal experience where this attitude of life gamification, this Super Mario effect, led to more success and therefore more learning. So I have a science YouTube channel where I will sometimes use my engineering skills to build things such as the world's largest super soaker, or the Guinness World Record world's largest Nerf gun, or maybe this snowball machine gun, was fashioned from a leaf blower. That's my niece. Those are my nephews. I haven't quite figured it out, but when it comes to me, their uncle, they seem to have some trust issues. So these builds usually take me about 2 to 3 months, but there was one that took me 3 years. Basically, I wanted to make a dartboard where you could get a bullseye every time. The idea was that if you throw a dart, we could like track it through the air, and then we'd move the board to sort of like catch a bullseye. And so once we did the math, we realized that if we wanted to track the dart for a typical like game of darts, typical velocity, we would basically have to both track the dart and to move the board the same amount of time it takes for a human to blink once. No big deal, right? So I'm not going to bore you with all the details and the failures and the setbacks from a lot of metaphorical sliding green shells and those pesky hammerhead bros. But eventually we figured out it would take something that looks like this, which is 6 stepper motors and motion controllers, a Vicom motion capture system with 6 cameras, and just a ton of tweaking and rewriting the code. But finally, eventually, we arrived here. What's interesting is when I look back on that process, like I can honestly say my attitude towards that was the same attitude I had toward like rescuing the princess from Bowser. Like, of course, each failure and setback sucked. It stung. But it was no different than like falling in that pit on level 8-1, and you're like, and you got to go back to the level and try again. Like, it was always like, okay, that sucked, but what did we learn from that? Like, what can we do next for it? Let's hit it again. And this concept of life gamification is more than just like, have a positive attitude, right? Or never give up. Because those sort of imply you're having to endure against your true desire to quit. I feel like when you frame a challenge or a learning process in the way I'm describing, you actually want to do it. It feels natural to ignore the failures and try again. In the same way, a toddler will want to get up and try and walk again. Or in the same way you want to keep playing Super Mario Brothers. Or in the same way, the group on the right had a desire to stick with that puzzle 2.5 times longer. They weren't getting paid to do that. Nobody was forcing them or watching them. It was just them on their computer alone in their house. Their outlook made it so they wanted to keep trying and learning. And the icing on the cake for the dartboard was I took it on Jimmy Kimmel and challenged him to a game of darts. And I'll just set this clip up by saying 2 things. The first is we also had a mode on the board where if your buddy had it and threw a dart, the board would move the other way. And the second is that we couldn't get this thing working during rehearsal, and it was just barely kind of creeping along. I get up to stand in the elevator, which is the door that moves up before you go out on stage. I look to the right, all 6 cameras had failed. So my buddy John is feverishly like restarting all the cameras as I'm going out onto stage knowing this, and there's like 4 things and bits that I work up to the dartboard as the sort of grand finale. So just keep that in mind as this clip starts. Like, that's where my headspace is. 3 freaking years, and it comes down to this moment. What you're gonna do is you're gonna give this dart to your buddy. Okay. And you're gonna challenge him just to like hit the board.
Just try to hit the board.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right, hot shot. We gonna double or nothing?
All right. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And so then I step up
It
here.
does this automatically.
That's right.
And you built this.
That's right.
Yeah.
I step up. Here we go. Fake it till you make it. I will say, in all of our testing, literally, we never had a dead center bullseye as much as that one right there. And so, like, after that, I haven't even touched the board since. I'm like, I'm so done with it. And I really believe that if you reframe like the challenges, it can make all the difference. I have a simple thought experiment to sort of showcase this. Let's say I gave you a test and it had instructions on it that you would carry out. And to do that, it had sort of buttons like this. And the instructions would say something like push button 3 for 5 seconds, and then push button 6 for 1 second, then push buttons 3 and 5 for 6 seconds, and so on. And unless you carried out the instructions on page 1 exactly, you couldn't see the other 32 pages of the test. How much would I have to pay you to take that test for an hour? Now suppose I change the word test here to game, and I rotated this. And for the input device, I shrunk the buttons and moved them here. And I gave it a cool paint job, and maybe different button styles. And then instead of using words, I represented the tasks you needed to accomplish visually like this. Note the output is the exact same. You have to push these buttons in a very specific manner to move on to the next page, or level as it were. Now picture it's 1986. How much would you pay me to take this test, just for an hour? If you have a very bad imagination, here's a hint to the right answer. I know, I was there.
Oh, don't come on me, go play with it.
That has to be the greatest YouTube clip of all time. So as a science YouTuber, sometimes I feel people have framed the act of learning science in a negative way. It's been taught poorly, so it feels scary to them. It feels something more like this. And my approach is to take the same physics lessons you might have hated and to try and sort of trick you into learning something through something cool. Basically to go from this to this. So for example, in this video, I made a hot tub with liquefied sand. And this is another one of my nephews with unexplained trust issues. I explained in the video that it's a fluidized bed, and then we talk about the principle of buoyancy and how it makes the whole thing work. And I use several examples, like, you know, the blow dryer with the ping pong ball like this. I like to think my approach to science is similar to velociraptor hunting patterns. So I get people to come in with something cool and amazing, like the sand hot tub, and then when they least expect it, admittedly, the analogy breaks down a little bit right there at the end. But by reframing the learning process and focusing on the cool end goal, the fear of failure is often taken off the table, and learning just comes more naturally. I'll close with this thought. Someone came up with this cartoon, and I totally love it. This is so true, but often in life, we tell ourselves that the top version is what we want. That's what we expect. But then something happens. Maybe it's a really bad grade on a test, or a meeting with a client that goes horribly wrong. Maybe it's a bad breakup. Maybe we miss a wide open shot. Some kind of green shell hits you. And so at that first setback or sign of failure, doubt creeps in. We tell ourselves we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough. And yet, if the bottom rectangle here is a game where now your bikes crash and you have to get your bike across to the flag, it's not, oh, I hit these rocks, I'm just gonna leave my bike here, I'm not good enough, and you quit and walk away. You see that flag to the right and you're like, nah, like what did I just learn? You're like, okay, next time I think I'm gonna come out with more speed and I'm gonna lift the front of my bike up. You wanna try it again, you're immediately excited to go for it again. We sort of tell ourselves we want our life's challenges to look like the top one, but that's boring. If that were a real video game or book or movie, and that went out to the market, it would be a total failure. Nobody would buy it. Where's the risk and the reward? Where's the challenge? There's no feeling of satisfaction. The bottom picture is real life, and that's not a bug, that's a feature. Think about anything that means anything to you in life, whether it's a degree, a relationship with a friend, or someone in your family, maybe a professional accomplishment. I can guarantee you it came from something that looks like the bottom and not the top. Failing and failing and failing and eventually succeeding to the point that it now holds value. Just like the most meaningful high fives of my adolescence were those when I said, dude, I finally beat Bowser last night. I feel like a lot of the successes in my life have come down to the Super Mario effect. And while framing challenges like this has worked for me, of course results may vary. Everyone is going to be different, and I don't know exactly what it looks like for you to take this principle and map it into your life. But if we got these very real results from a very different cross-section of very unique people, Clearly, I'm not alone. There's some universal principle at play here. By shifting your focus to the princess and treating your life's challenges like video games, you can trick your brain and actually learn more and see more success. Thank you.
All right, with this, we go on to the next session or the next portion, and that is the breaking down of, like whatever it is that you guys want to talk about, A to Z, and how that works. And notice what he was talking about, how reality oftentimes looks different than what we might have imagined. So the last thing that he showed in the picture, the reality is very much like the reality is very different. It's more exciting and challenging and so on. But because our expectations are different and they don't align with the reality, a lot of times when things happen, we are the ones who take the hit. So with that, I hope all of these things are becoming more clear now. And this is something that we went through last time. This is something that we did during the last session. And we went a little bit into detail. So just an overview if you want to kind of skim through it. When it comes to learning, a lot of people have had this aversion to learning, like reading books or actually sitting down and going to school, for example. But it may not actually have to do with people not wanting to learn. In fact, they want to learn, and that's just the human mind. But it's just a matter of how they might have had, or what kind of expectations they might have had, versus what the reality actually looks like. And that goes two ways, in terms of the teachers and the administrators framing things a certain way, and mapping out classrooms a certain way, designing curricula a certain way, designing lesson plans a certain way. That's one. And on the other hand, also what the kids were expecting and how the parents were framing it to the kids and why they were going to school and so on. And also the background in terms of the process where a person might have felt that they needed to succeed, and if they didn't succeed, what that would look like because of their context, and how they might have come to learn that failure is not okay, and that you have to be perfect from the get-go. So with that, whatever it is that you would like to discuss now, we can do that inshallah before we go answer the question and conclude. That puzzle that's sitting in the back of your mind trying to be resolved. So before we get there, let's go ahead and see if there's anything that you want to go over, any kind of case study, any challenge or thing that you want to map out so we can go forward. Zaid? Go ahead.
I can't really think of one right now.
Okay. Anybody have anything that they want to go over?
I can't think of anything right now. Okay. I'm still digesting the videos we watched.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll actually pause and not actually do a new one today, and we will go ahead and try to solve this puzzle right here. So we're not going to actually do one today, the case study. We'll just go ahead and try to address this challenge.
Should we go ahead and answer?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you should.
First, I would try to like ask more questions, like about like what exactly is annoying him from his family members and coworkers and all that. I think, like I see, he says they're doing things that bother him, and he thinks they should know better. And like that's his perception, but I would want to know like exactly what they're doing that's bothering him, because I think that would give a better idea of like how he's thinking. I feel like that you need to like understand his perception better right now as the first step.
So you're focusing on trying to understand it.
Yeah.
Did you say that he doesn't have current plans, that he's been asked already?
Oh no, we didn't go into that yet. So he might have thought of committing suicide, but he might have, so there's different possibilities here. There are people who are Muslims who know that, suicide for depression and stuff is not okay. And so they actually don't commit suicide, but they are living sort of like for lack of a better word, a very tight, miserable life, right? And so they're living in misery essentially. And so there is that person who has thought about it, but they've stopped themselves because they valued, like this prohibition. They were adhering to this boundary because they're still able to, of course, manage their situations by saying, okay, I'm not going to do this and this and stuff, right? Because there are some boundaries that they've sort of put in stone essentially, right? Or like a written in stone. And then at the same time, there are people who have considered suicide, but they have not actually come up with a plan, but they don't have a boundary to prevent themselves from actually committing. And there's another group of people who have committed, have thought of committing suicide and actually have a plan in place. In this case, we just have a possible ideation, meaning the idea has occurred to a person. Either they might have stopped themselves because of Islam or some other reason, like family or whatever and stuff, or they might have thought about it, but they have yet to come up with a plan. But they might come up with a plan in the future, or they might have thought about it, but they also have a plan. So any of these possibilities could happen as a result of this idea. So the consequences or the steps thereafter, we don't know yet. We just know that there is an ideation, and that's it. That they thought about it, but we haven't actually explored much into it. This is just the first thing. The person is just telling you all these things. They're just sort of unloading on you, trying to like reach out to you and just kind of like discuss. This is your first exposure, essentially.
Right. From what I've learned from mental health first aid is that when there is the mention of suicide ideation, that you do go ahead and ask them up front, do you have a plan? And if they say yes, then you find out, do they have the ability with them right now to carry out the plan? So if they say yes, I'm going to take pills, then you find out if they have the pills. So I would just say, like first aid speaking, that is something that would need to be addressed in this initial contact.
Yeah.
And then find out where they are on the spectrum. And then of course, if they do have the means and they're serious, then you have to contact authorities if you're not the one who can actually take care of them. But yeah, I think finding out, let's say you discover that, it just crossed their mind, but they're not really serious about it. Then I would say, yeah, like hearing them out on what is actually happening, like get some specifics. I would say further down the line, you would need to develop some plans as far as, this wouldn't be in the first meeting, but further down the line, you want to develop some plans for different things that can change his habits and his routines that may help him. And it may be that he needs to change his environment based on the people or coworkers.
What if it's his family?
Sorry?
What if it's his family?
If it's his family, that's very difficult. But he still has to learn different coping techniques and different ways of sometimes a coping technique may be just learning how somebody else may be thinking, finding different ways of dealing with the anxiety that's created, or different ways of communicating.
Okay, so let me challenge you guys a little bit deeper.
Okay.
A little bit more, okay? So in the first video that we watched, they told you about how they presented how the mind works in terms of associations and patterns and behaviors and so on, right? So how could that have impacted the current dynamics in the person's mind? Or at least the perceptions.
Can you rephrase that?
Yeah, so based on the first video, in terms of how the brain, it gets wired and rewired, and how we learn and how we sort of normalize, or like not normalize, but like how we sort of visualize certain things, or how we perceive certain things, right? How could that be in play here? Because we're trying to target the fundamental issue. We're not, so we definitely want to make sure that we can help the person in terms of managing his, everything that's going on. But ultimately, deep down inside, what could be happening? Deep down, very deep inside, meaning like how the brain is wired currently. And that's, in terms of why the person is feeling a certain way, why he's perceiving things a certain way. So how does perception play into this? What could be going wrong deep down there?
Self-esteem issues, and then anytime he gets some sort of correction or some sort of feedback that could be construed as negative, he takes it pretty hard.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go even deeper than that. Where does self-esteem issue, or where does that issue, or where could that issue arise?
There's a lot of different ways. One of them is that he wasn't raised with people who were giving him positive feedback and constructive criticisms.
Okay, so that could have definitely impacted the things. And how did that impact him? Well, so think about in terms of expectations versus reality, like the small T truth versus capital T truth, right? So think about that.
So he may be expecting perfection of himself.
Yeah, he could be expecting
and people around him.
Yeah, that could definitely have like a big issue. He could have also perceived a certain lifestyle that he might have seen in movies, or he might have heard of, in like stories and stuff. Maybe he wanted the same things. Maybe certain dynamics made him feel a certain way because there was dysfunction, for lack of a better word, in the family, for example. So discuss that a little bit more. How could those things have impacted his current perception? Current meaning it can change, and it might not have been the same, like before, and it doesn't need to be the same moving forward. How could that, if we address that, how could that thereby impact this person's resulting self-esteem, and in terms of their ability to cope in stressful situations without getting impacted this way moving forward? Because life, the last picture in the second video, he said, it's like hills and going up and down, and like rocks and like other things that you might get hit, So how could you reframe this entire thing so that the person moves from the first picture, or the top picture, to the bottom picture in terms of like expectations? You can take your time to think about it, because I'm asking it like a deeper level question. So, think about it. Yeah. See if you can make those connections between all the stuff that we've talked about until today, but also the stuff that we introduced today.
I think they probably had like experiences that reinforced that, like the idea, like that when he does something bad, that it's a lot worse than it actually is in reality. But then also, like he probably maybe he was raised in a way where like his value is dependent on the results. or just having success.
Yeah, could be like something that doesn't actually address the fundamental human desires of things and stuff, right? Needs and things like that. It might not have matched, right? The expectations from a person may not have matched what would actually make them happy and motivated and feeling like they want to continue doing certain things. So that there might have been distortion or misunderstanding or misapplication related to what success means and so on. Okay, or how to get success, even like the process and the end result, both of them. I actually had this case once where somebody came in. They were mentioning a lot about depression, and I guess they didn't want to consider suicide because it's haram, but they were really like feeling this way. They said they felt like nobody really cares about them, and they felt like their life was in shambles and stuff. And they had also lost their father, I believe, and so their father, they had lost their father recently, like meaning like relative to when we spoke to them. And so this was a situation that was brought. This is pretty much like almost exactly what the person was telling us. When I say us, like me and one of my team members. So this was something that we had to really understand really well to be able to address that. So before I go into some of the things that we went into, just want to get a little bit more deeper into like, what would you do? Think about how the brain works. Think about how perceptions work. Think about how our own realities look like. Realities, in this case, I mean perceptions, but also how the actual realities, capital T truths, looks like. How our experiences within our bubble, meaning our life, right, our own framework and our own experiences and thoughts and imaginations and learnings and so on, how our immediate stuff impacts our perception, and how that can oftentimes not really match with the reality, right, of how things are. Social psychologists are going to talk a lot about this when they talk about the difference between our perceptions and the real world life, right, in the real world. This is also where eyewitness testimonies can, for example, be impacted. I don't know if I mentioned. I think I think we did the color, not color, the change blindness, right? We did the change blindness activity here.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Okay. So that also relates to this, because there are certain things that you're focusing on as opposed to other things. You might fixate on certain things more so than others. We also talked about how negative experiences are a lot more difficult to erase, right? Because you need at least twice as many positive experiences to counter one single, to counter every single negative experience. And when I say at least, that's something that doesn't mean that in reality it's only two. It might actually be 10, 15, 30, and depending on the situation, to counter any negative experience, because of how a person, how meaningful that particular context might have been, or that situation might have been, or that feeling might have been. And so when something different happens and stuff, it can impact the person a bit more. So some people who are extremely sincere may also get hurt more than other people because of how vested they were into that particular dynamic or relationship. It doesn't mean that it needs to continue like this. There are definitely strategies to manage this, in terms of every sincere person can have certain expectations from others. And when you look at scholars and what they've said over the history, Muslim scholars, Islamic scholars, Muslim Islamic scholars, because that's not the same thing. So Muslim scholars are just people that are experts in anything, and they're also Muslim. Islamic scholars are people that are experts of Islam, experts in the sense they studied it, not necessarily in terms of practice and so on. And they may or may not be Muslim. So I have to qualify both. I have to say Muslim, Islamic scholars and stuff, right, that actually understood Islam. So they've mentioned, for example, things like be careful in terms of what expectations you have from others. And, be more tough on you. Be tougher on yourself than what you expect from others. Be lenient on others and stuff, and be tougher on yourself. So understanding that can help you, because you can control. You understand what's going on in your head, at least a little bit, more so. But it's still more so than what you understand of what's going on in other people's heads and whatever history that they have and so on. So with all of this in mind, how do you address this situation here? Definitely, understanding how to navigate mental health is a plus. understanding fundamentally how mental health is mental health first aid or mental health assistance in general, right? Or treatment, all of that, where it's sourced from, how the methodologies have been built over the years. If you actually look at the history and you look at the research that's out there, you understand how what kind of tools psychologists use right now and why they use that. First, they have to understand how the brain works and stuff and how perceptions work. But all of that is sourced from the various research and theories that have been out there, right? And over time, some of those, many of them, can change. And they get updated and so on. So whereas before, people used to think that the brain does not change, it's fixed and that's the end of it. And so they had this fixed mindset thing. But as we looked at when Dr. Carol Dweck, when she was mentioning her stuff about the growth mindset, that was relatively recently, within like the last 10 to 15 years. That's where this framework was starting to be adjusted more fundamentally, right? So understanding how the brain works oftentimes has been based on the standing theories of that time, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily actually fitting with reality. So even with that, you have to understand. And I don't want to say at all that we shouldn't go and get treatment, because of the fact that they are looking at, even if they don't fundamentally address the underlying issue, they can at least address, in terms of treatment, the issues. They can at least address, help a person sort of manage that, mitigate the stress and so on. And that's that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to fundamentally get a person back to a pre-trauma or pre-negative experience situation. However, with the understanding deeper down, right, understanding how the brain actually works and so on, we can actually probably target those fundamental root causes of things and stuff. So one of the things I was mentioning is the negative memory anchors and how that kind of impact things and stuff, right? And being able to critically think and brainstorm and think about more possibilities than the limited that we might have had, by discussing with others and stuff and thinking other possibilities of the why behind the negative experiences that we had, why a person treated me a certain way, what else could have gone in the other person's mind, for example. Helping all of that can help us understand how to navigate those things and eventually close those cases in the past that were holding us hostage, essentially, those negative memory anchors that were holding us in the past, unhooking them and moving forward. And then actually getting to a point where we're not actually held back anymore, which means we are no longer needing that kind of that long-term treatment, essentially, because we've sort of resolved the situations that were holding us back. This is the thing that I prefer, and it seems to be matching whatever the data is saying, and it's also aligning with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had conveyed to us and the Prophet conveyed. At least this is my my approach, even if there are competing theories and stuff like that. But again, because there are competing theories out there, doesn't necessarily mean that any one theory necessarily is worse than another. We have to unpack it a little bit more and actually explore them and stuff. But I'm just mentioning what I've come to sort of found very useful and what is making sense with the evidence that's coming in. So anything else that you guys have on this? Any comments, any thoughts, more, any ideas that came to your mind? I know a lot of what we get into can be very theoretical. That for some people, it might get a little bit intense. But I hope that repeated exposure to this stuff is going to make it a little bit easier for us to internalize that. And when we actually face a situation where that theory needs to be actualized, then in that case, it might be a little bit easier for us, just because it's been sort of set in our mind so much that it's been coming into our mind so much that it eventually sort of held on. And then it makes it a lot easier for us to navigate a particular context. So this is hands-on experience, and actually in educational psychology, and also just in curriculum design and so on, and just educational philosophy in general in the 1800s and also in the late 1700s, but also especially in the early 1900s, you're going to see that this discussion of what is it that a person needs to know and what should we teach in schools and so on, and why should we teach things, and what is education, what is the definition of education, what is the definition of learning, how are they similar and how are they different, how does that relate to what a person should learn in school, and what is it that we should not teach them in school, we don't need to teach them in school, and how does that impact them in their lives and stuff, right? All of this stuff was being discussed back then. So the public school system and just universities in general, education in general, there are certain assumptions that people had made and they built upon them. So they, for example, assumed that people need to learn a certain set of skills, and so they build curricula to match that. And when they did that, they ended up going forward with those assumptions. And then as things didn't match whatever the reality looked like, they tried to adjust that. So you'll see academics are always going to be adjusting and modifying and updating this stuff, to just be flexible in that, understand that this is what's happening. And that's when Common Core, for example, was introduced. A lot of people got thrown off, but it also was because it's not for many people, it's not a fixed understanding of what it is that actually is needing to be understood and taught. And so when people see that there are certain differences or certain things that are not matching the reality, they adjust that. They adjust the approaches and so on. They're trying to identify, out of all the things out there, all the possibilities out there, they're trying to test different theories and different things. They try to the best of their ability based on whatever available research that's there, but there's not enough research, and there's always going to be a need for more research because of the infinite number of possibilities and so on. And this is one reason we had mentioned earlier also, that a person who is a scientist focusing on experiments and so on is not actually going to be able to prove the existence or the lack of existence, or the non-existence or the existence of God. They're not going to be able to approach that answer conclusively ever. So to say a person is an atheist based on scientific verification and so on, that's a long shot. So there comes to a point where an atheist would actually have to have a certain assumption or a belief that is not backed by science, or cannot be backed by science at the moment. So these are some things to just keep in mind that also associate with, that also connect to perceptions and things like that. So any other ideas that you guys came up with?
I was just noticing that a lot of his comments are about perceptions of other people.
Yep.
How he's perceiving other people and how other people are perceiving him.
Yep. So you sort of got to the point where now you can actually address that, right?
Right.
So it may not actually be happening the way he's perceiving it. It may not be that this is an atypical dynamic. It may just be that this is how he's perceiving it. Remember I mentioned about the negative experiences, and you need at least twice as many to counter them, right? And so this could be one of those situations. Maybe he did have a negative thing, but because he sort of was so vested with one expectation, and it didn't go the way he thought it should have gone, because he really, really, really believed that it's supposed to go that way, and it just went the opposite way. Now that negative experience was his negative memory anchor that held him hostage as he moved forward. Now everything else, or a lot of things, for example, may have been impacted by this perception, or this negative memory anchor that's holding him, his perception hostage. And so now he's perceiving things that may not actually be, out of the ordinary. They might not be atypical, but now he's perceiving them to be really negative or something like that.
Right. And some people, they value things more than others, or some people don't value. So for instance, some people may be careless in the words that they use when they're speaking with other people, and they may be hurting their feelings or saying something that's perceived as, harmful by the other person. And unless that's communicated to them, hey, what you just said wasn't kind or something, then it can continue over and over again. Or if somebody doesn't correct their perception.
Yep. And the person who might have said that word may have done it intentionally, or may not have known that they're doing this, so they're having that kind of impact and stuff, right? So yep.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you see that in married couples, like where one of them really values maybe an anniversary or a birthday or something, and the other one just doesn't care about it at all. So the person who does value it may be extremely hurt and read a lot into it if there's no celebration or no mention of that anniversary or birthday.
Yeah, and you know, this person might especially feel that if throughout the rest of the year this person is not giving that kind of special attention that they as a spouse would want and you know might need, because they're human beings too. So if that's not happening, then they're just valuing that one day and stuff like that. And you can see that, you know, with when people celebrate, for example, or they value like mothers and fathers and stuff, Mother's Day or Father's Day. A lot of times it may just be, for example, that they, you know, in cases, I'm not saying it's all the cases, in cases there might be where people actually felt that this is the only day that they feel special the entire year, right? And other times they're just sort of like set aside or they're not thought about and stuff, and they're sort of alone and stuff like that. So I definitely see this as well in married couples and stuff, you know, in the times when we interact with them. For example, a person might feel that, you know, the other spouse should be doing certain things a certain way, but the other spouse, first of all, may have actually wanted to do those things, but maybe they did them in a certain way that they thought is going to be appreciated by the spouse that wanted these things, right? But in fact, you know, it wasn't that this person didn't want to do the same things that their spouse wanted them to do, but it's just that the way they did it may have been different than the way that the other spouse had expected or wanted, right? And so there's that misunderstanding too. But there's also situations where the other person had no idea that this is something valuable to the other person, so they didn't even know about it. Yeah. So definitely these are things that come into play. And subhanAllah, if we really go into like this understanding, we go deeper into this, you start understanding like how simple, how powerful, how impactful communication is, effective communication is, right? In relationships and dynamics, in, you know, in just everything, right? And how much the lack of it or the miscommunication can impact these dynamics, right? So it's really interesting and it's really fascinating stuff too, and it really can figure out, like it can really help you figure out how to address these situations with simple strategies that, you know, somebody might say that these are common sense strategies, but it's a person who really understands the value of them, right? But a person who's never been exposed to these or didn't really understand them in like a setting, they haven't been like taught these or they haven't been mentored in these and stuff, like they still understand this, or maybe they haven't gone through an experience where they got to realize the value of this. So a lot of these things are definitely things that, you know, we would need to discuss in here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that there are different ways of communicating. And was that book, The 5 Love Languages?
Yeah. The 5 Languages of Love. Actually, there's another one for children as well. So there's the one for, you know, spouses, but there's another one. I believe it's the same author.
Okay.
Yeah, for kids, like teenagers and stuff, and understanding how to navigate working with kids, working with your own children, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's valuable.
Yep. There's another book called, I believe it's called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. I think that's the title, and it goes into a little bit of the differences in terms of communication, the general like the trends in communication between men and women, and the differences between them, and how to understand that so that conflicts can be de-escalated, essentially.
Right. And then you can actually understand why somebody might be upset.
Yeah.
With what just happened, or yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. And a lot of times when people don't have these kinds of things happening, like the, you know, effective communication styles, what happens is that the people that are receiving this stuff, meaning the negative communication and so on, or the maybe even ignorant communication, for lack of a better word. Ignorant meaning that the person hasn't actually understood the proper techniques and stuff, right? In terms of how communication can work, how it can be like optimized and so on. So let's say they're in the receiving end. The impact that happens on the person receiving it is, you know, normally we assume good intent from everyone. This is like human beings. We feel comfortable, we feel good and stuff by assuming good intent from everyone. It makes us all feel good, right? So we default to assuming good from people. And that's just like the natural way of thinking. But at the end of the day, when a person is doing something that's hurting us and we keep trying to find an excuse for them, but eventually we're just not able to, we then have to fill in that blank, the missing link, we replace it with evil intent because there's no other explanation that we can give this, because we run out of explanations. And then we sort of build upon that, and we started thinking that this person is actually, having ill intent, because that's the only way that this could make sense, because every other possibility didn't make sense. Like, okay, if I assume this person was, maybe they had a bad day at work, okay, then be like, okay, maybe it'll work for that day. But the next day, the person acts the same way, but they were just really happy when they came home. And when I asked them how their, work was, they said it was great. So, okay, well, maybe that's not going to work. So that missing link didn't work. Let me try a different one. So they keep trying that until they just run out of things to think of. And so they assume then there's ill intent, right? On the other hand, the missing link might actually be that this person never actually learned communication skills, or maybe they had some other, backstory in their history, in their background, that ended up causing them to assume that women, for example, like to be treated this way, or to assume that children like need to be treated a certain way and stuff, right? But that didn't actually have an actual basis, right? It was just sort of like what they perceived to be the case. So if I just open the conversation and say, hey, I didn't like that. I didn't like that you spoke to me like that. Maybe you didn't mean it. It just hurt me a little bit. Could we try speaking a different way? Or maybe you didn't think about it, or whatever. We just kind of have that conversation. I've had situations where somebody said something rude, right? Whether I'm working with a case, whether I'm working with some students, whether I'm working with some community members or whatever, right? And somebody says something rude, right? So for me, alhamdulillah, like I have to frame it a certain way, so like I'm able to navigate that without taking it personally, right? I might give them excuses and stuff. I think about all the possibilities that could be, and then also give myself room to be comfortable knowing that there are possibilities that didn't occur to me that could have also taken place, so I don't assume ill intent, right? People assume that there's only a limited number of possibilities, and if they run out of those, because that's what they came to their mind, that there are no other possibilities, right? So what I say is, like, there are a bunch of possibilities that might come to your mind. There's also a bunch of possibilities that have not yet come to your mind. And so you can sort of default and say, well, I don't know. I'm not going to make a judgment on this, and that's okay, because there are things I don't know yet. Let me investigate a little bit further. So I've had cases where somebody speaks to me and they say a rude comment to me, even if I'm trying to help them out, right? They just say, well, like, how do I know this or that? Like, how do I know that you're not going to think this way or that way, right? So, or they might say, for example, well, you could be like, just like pretending all this stuff or whatever, right? For me, if I'm giving them like time, I'm not actually charging them anything like that. For me, I could take that personally. I could say, well, I'm spending all my time and stuff helping you out. But I tell, for me, I understand where that thing is coming from. They are concerned about this, and they're right. I could be doing this for many reasons. Maybe they had history where a lot of people may have done it that way, or maybe they have, maybe this person had perceived it to be done that way many times to them. So I tell them, you're right, and I understand where you're coming from, and that's something that I will have to prove to you over time, right? That I'm actually here trying to help you out, like trying to assist you in whatever it is. When I say help, I try not to use that word. I say like assist or whatever. It's more of an empowering thing for people. So just something that I find useful. So here I don't take it personally, right? I just tell myself, yeah, okay. So I sort of let it not escalate more. There's a case where I was working with a student, and this is a young student, right? So she was, I think, in third grade or something like that. So I was at their house, and I was working, and this is like in their, I guess, like the main area where everyone sits and stuff, right? So the parents are around and stuff, and like I'm working with the girl. I think she was in third grade at that time, and she starts like giving me attitude. Like she doesn't want to listen, she doesn't want to do any work and stuff. She just wants to like talk rude to me and stuff. Like just actually like make noises and stuff and grunting and things like that. I think I mentioned this story here, but I think it's relevant as a reminder here. So instead of reacting negatively, I really calmly, I say, that came off a little bit rude, but I don't think you were trying to be rude. And that immediately, when like they became conscious of this, they're like, yeah, they started like changing their mindset, and they started like sort of like being more conscious, right? But at the same time, I said alongside it, I said, what's on your mind? Is there anything that happened today? And I sort of detached myself, so I didn't take it personally, because I attributed this thing, the way they're acting, to something that was in their mind, some negative memory anchor that might have happened that particular day, a few hours before, just a minute before, or something like that, right? And so this person starts starts talking about everything. So I stopped, thing. I said, it came off like this. How was your day? Like, what happened today and stuff, right? And then she started talking about how a person in her class was bullying her and stuff, and she was really upset. And she tried to talk to the teacher, and the teacher didn't take her side. She was just telling her to sort of deal with it, sort of, right? And so at least this is how the person was feeling. And so she was really upset about that because she hadn't found closure to that situation. And so now her attitude with me reflected that negative memory anchor that was bothering her early in that day. And so I started talking to her, really compassionate and stuff, helping her feel that, I get it and stuff, so your hurting must have really, So we started talking a little bit. And as soon as that conversation finished and she felt like that case was closed, suddenly she got really excited about learning and stuff, and she got really happy about it. She was talking about all these things, and she was really happy. And then the entire rest of the session went really smoothly. So just that little thing right there, addressing that, not taking it personally, helped a huge amount, right? And likewise, in other cases, when I actually had situations where people had conflict with like relationships, family dynamics, and so on, so these kinds of strategies were really useful here. So here, this particular person, and I'm going to close with this, inshallah, this particular person that we were dealing with, the first thing I did was I just heard them out. I showed, with my facial features and my emotions and stuff, that I was present with them, and I was really, really empathizing with them, empathizing as opposed to sympathizing. And Brene Brown has a video where she discusses that a little bit, so you guys can watch that. Inshallah, it's a short video, but it's really nice. Anyways, so she put like in this particular case, I started taking notes and stuff. I would, just like make sure that the person felt like I was really hearing them out. I really was there to help out and stuff. And that's it. Obviously I wasn't charging this person anything. So, and I say obvious because he's the person, he was dealing with this, and he just reached out to us directly. And he was a youth at that time at least. So I started taking notes and stuff, and I asked more questions and stuff. I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense and stuff. Okay, that makes sense, and so on and stuff, right? Just trying to understand what the person was going through, why they were feeling this way. Now, I didn't have to agree with anything that they were doing necessarily. I just had to understand them, and I needed to let them feel like I understood them. Not only did I need to understand, that's my internal feeling, right? But at the same time, I needed to let them feel like I understood them, and I needed to show that somehow, right? By asking them certain questions, by like summarizing like what I've heard from them, asking for clarification and things like that. And at the end of the day, when they approved what I had said, and they felt therefore that I have understood what they were trying to say, then they felt a little bit more open to actually getting some strategies and just taking the next steps forward. And when they felt like that, I said, this is good, and it looks like you want to move forward, so I will help you, inshallah, and we will continue helping you until the very end. So however long that takes, we will be with you, inshallah. So let's start. We're going to break down things step by step, and so on. So this was the person who was asking for multiple different things, multiple different coaching that I do. So I was dealing with them, but this is how it started off, and that's it. The person started reframing things. They started understanding that things are even the person that was bothering them at home, one of their family members, they reframed the entire process as well. So these are things that really helped in this particular context, the first session I'm talking about. Yeah. And subhanAllah, these strategies, just little things of understanding the other person, hearing them out, giving them time and space to like speak freely, and even if they're they might say some words and stuff that you don't agree with, this is not the time for telling them what to do or to correcting them or whatever. This is a time for you to also become vulnerable and understand where they came from, understand the feelings that they might be feeling, because you can recall a similar incident where you might have felt a certain way, right? And that makes you actually be in the moment with them, understand them. And when they feel that way, they're going to appreciate that a lot. And you can actually appreciate it just to begin with by saying that I appreciate that you wanted this to share with you were comfortable to share this with me, and I will help you to the best of my ability. And if I can't do something, then I will direct you to somebody else. And this is again authenticity, where you're sort of you're honest about this, and they feel that you're only going to go to whatever extent that you're capable of, but you're not going to go into things that you're not able to do. And then that builds trust. And when that trust is built, then they're going to actually take on the strategies that you're going to be mentioning. And that's it. Just an introduction session. Just hear them out. understand everything. Don't make it seem like you're doing a mission, like you have like they're a project for you, but make them feel like a human being. Make them feel like you're there because you care about them. Make them feel like you actually want to understand this, because it's gonna make you feel better. It's gonna make not make you feel better, but like this is the person who you are. As in, you really feel you really want to help them out. You want to be there with them and stuff like that. And this is what you genuinely care about, right? You care about helping them, and you care about being there, you're empowering them. And at the end of the day, that you're never going to take credit for what they ended up doing. So you're going to give them space to make their, take their steps and stuff and go forward. And that you're not going to associate their success to your own efforts and stuff. And this is it. Once the person feels like that and they start taking steps and they start seeing success and progress, then the entire thing is really fun and stuff. And notice that this is a little bit different than some of the other things that you might have come across or people might have done. But I just wanted to give you guys just some context and some things that are real world scenarios essentially. Does anybody have any thoughts on this or any other things that came to your mind or anything that you wanted to talk about? Anything? Okay, if there's nothing else, then we will go ahead, inshallah, and pause this. Stop the recording. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.